This is going to be a tutorial on how you use the Savage Soul character generator, also called the SoulGen. So, without further ado, to get the SoulGen, go to savagesoul.com and click on the character generator tab, and you will see here a link for the most updated SoulGen. You click that and it will open it in Google Sheets. Give it a second to load, as it is quite complicated spreadsheet. And now what you'll see here is just a view only version. In order to make it a usable spreadsheet, you need to make a copy. So file, make a copy, and then save it to your Google Drive as the name of the character that you want to create. So in this case, we're going to create Joe Wizard. Okay. Now it's saving to your Google Drive, and once it appears, you will now have a fully functional version of the SoulGen that is saved as Joe Wizard. At this point, you can close the actual SoulGen because the only thing you'll be needing is the Joe Wizard's sheet. So go through block by block. The name block is just free text, so type in your character's name. Sex is a drop down. If you choose neuter, you want to make sure you have corresponding peculiarity like standard of beauty. Otherwise, male and female and various sexual preferences are going to determine the effect of certain peculiarities such as physical beauty or standard of beauty, etc. Age doesn't really matter unless you have a peculiarity that makes it matter, like immature. If you were to take immature, you would of course want to plug in an appropriate age relative to the level of immature that you take, but in all other regards, age doesn't matter for purposes of attributes or peculiarities or anything. So you can basically just choose whatever age makes sense for your character. Now here you'll see for size and weight, which are very significant in the Savage Soul. Because I'm in the United States, it's easier for us to think in terms of statute measurements. So the input box is in inches and pounds, but it will automatically convert to meters and kilograms. So let's make Joe Wizard 72 inches, which is 6 feet tall, 1.85 meters, and we'll make him 220 pounds, which is the equivalent of 100 kilograms. What you'll notice is that by increasing Joe Wizard's weight to 200 kilograms or 200 pounds or more, the generator automatically adjusted his size from size 5 to size 6. And this has some immediate effects. It increases Joe Wizard's body and strength, meaning he's a little bit harder to hurt. He can hit harder, but it also means that he's easier to hit because he's a bigger target. So you'll notice that his defense score and his passive defense score went down. That's not necessarily something that we want for Joe Wizard. At the opposite extreme, if we were to make him, say, 5 foot 1 inches tall and 110 pounds, it would adjust his size to size 4. And at this point, he'd be easier to hurt, won't hit as hard, but will be harder to hit in that his defense and passive defense will have gone up to 6 and 11. But in this case, let's just stick with Joe Wizard being fairly average at 5 foot 10 inches tall and 180 pounds, 81.82 kilograms. Which makes him size 5 and mass 5. Here is a drop down for PC and NPC. This is significant because various peculiarities in the game are restricted either to PCs or NPCs. But in this case, we're creating a PC, so there would be no need to choose the NPC drop down. Here, type in whatever the starting experience amount is that your GM has specified. 500 is pretty common for a standard starting PC in a normal game, but it really could be any number that your GM assigns. If he's running a superheroic game, it could even be 2,500 points or 3,000 points, whatever the GM determines is appropriate. But you'll notice that when you type in the experience in the experience box, it will also always show how much experience is currently unused in the box right next to it. Hair, eye color, and color are a just free text box, so you could type in whatever you want, and it won't obviously affect anything. It'll just be, it'll help to flesh out your character. So in this case, brown hair, blue eyes, and tanned skin. Personality traits are just help define the character for role playing. The GM might find that it's worth experience if you were to play in accordance with particularly interesting personality traits, but a player should never be restricted by his personality traits. It really should just be something that helps define his role playing and potentially could be a source of some bonus experience from the game master. So with that said, we move down into the attributes box. This is where all the character's primary attributes are located, and what you'll see is there are 3 columns. The level at which the player has currently bought that attribute, it's always going to start at 0. The actual total, which is probably the most important column because it shows you what your current attribute score is at any moment in the game, and this will be automatically adjusted by things like injury condition and fatigued and winded and overall modifiers and various other things. And then the third column will show you what the different levels that the character has purchased, what they cost in terms of XP. So as an example, for Joe Wizard, we're going to buy him 1 point of body for 100 XPs. He is a wizard, so we're going to buy him 3 points of intellect for 300 XPs. We're going to buy him 1 point of willpower, which, as you can see, will increase his mana when we did that. And that leaves 50 points, which at this point we will add to leadership. So in the end, as you can see, Joe Wizard pretty much has 5s across the board, with the exception of body and strength, which are 6. His intellect is 8, which makes his sorcery 8. His leadership is 6, and his willpower is 6. And that automatically adjusted his mana, which is based upon willpower and intellect. So with these scores purchased, the next thing to do for Joe Wizard is to flesh him out with peculiarities. Now you'll notice that under the peculiarities are here, peculiarity disadvantages and peculiarity advantages. I should say before we move on that you'll notice that there are various boxes on the generator highlighted in yellow. Those are input boxes. Those are the only boxes that you should actually modify. All the boxes that are not in yellow are formulas or references to other cells that really should not be modified in the process of creating a character. If you try to do it, like if I were to try to modify this, for example, you'll get a warning that tells you you're modifying a cell that you shouldn't modify. It will let you do it if you click OK, but really if it was just an error, just click cancel and you'll be fine. So here in the peculiarities box, you'll see that at the very top it adds up how many unused C, which is combat peculiarity levels, and how many unused NC, which is non-combat peculiarity levels, the character currently has in the creation process. You'll see here in the disadvantages box there are only 5 slots. Through various years of playtesting, we discovered that more than 5 disadvantages becomes really hard for the GM to keep track of and manage. And also, limiting a character's disadvantages to 5 forces a player to really think about what disadvantages make the most sense for his character, rather than just taking a long list of disadvantages simply because they're worth extra peculiarity levels. So a character is limited to 5. Now, that doesn't mean the character can't have additional disadvantages that he may define for himself. And to the extent that he plays those disadvantages, the GM might want to award bonus experience points. But for the most part, a character's actual peculiarity disadvantages will be limited to 5. So you can select the peculiarity disadvantages in a couple of different ways. There's a complete drop down that lists all the disadvantages. You can either select one from there, such as cannot heal naturally, or in the alternative, you can just start typing what you want. So a very common disadvantage is no mutations. What no mutations means is that the character, while he can still be very interesting, he can have sorcery or spiritual calling or any of the various combat peculiarities. He can't have any peculiarity that is defined as a mutation. So some of those peculiarities are very advantageous, such as regeneration or olfactory targeting. But if a character takes no mutations, because he is restricted from taking any of those advantageous mutation peculiarities, it's worth 2 combat peculiarity levels. So as you can see, it automatically increased his unused combat peculiarities from 5, which is based upon his starting XPs, to 7. And that gives him bonus Cs, which, as I said, are combat peculiarities. And then we'll also select something that would only give him non-combat peculiarities. In this case, it will be sheltered, which means that the character is new to the world of 2195, and as a result, or whatever year your soul campaign is set in, and as a result, he's not familiar with things like magic or monsters, the various sorts of things that he might encounter in the soul world, which is primarily going to present non-combat type challenges, and therefore it awards him 2 non-combat peculiarity levels. He could take 3 more, obviously. In this case, he might want to take a fear, perhaps fear of undead. Maybe he had a bad experience with a skeleton or a zombie or something, and now he's terribly afraid of undead. But in any event, you can go through, and you'll notice that when you choose peculiarities, they will affect this box here that says character type. So with these peculiarities, none of which are considered mutations or game-changing or NPC only, you'll see that Joe Wizard is still showing up as a normal PC. If we were to take something that was restricted to NPCs, for example, like animal intelligence, you're going to see a warning show up here that says, this is a PC, you've chosen an NPC only peculiarity, you should probably do something about that. To the same extent, if you were to choose a peculiarity that is considered a mutation, then the box here will show you mutant. This is a PC mutant, which wouldn't be a problem, except that this particular PC has the disadvantage no mutations. So you could see right there that that would be inconsistent, and you would have to delete unholy. In that regard, whenever you need to delete a peculiarity, the best thing to do is just highlight the box and delete it. Don't try to select 0 or some other value, because what it's really looking for is a blank. So the best way to delete it, or the best way to get rid of it, is just to delete it. So going with just these disadvantages, we're going to start to define Joe Wizard by selecting his advantages. And just like with the disadvantages, there's a complete list here in a drop-down menu, but it's often easier to just start typing. So for example, his primary skill is going to be sorcery. So Joe Wizard will take sorcery at level 3. Now you see, when Joe Wizard took sorcery at level 3, it immediately reduced his unused C's, combat peculiarity levels, by 3, leaving him with six more that he can spend. So a nice complement to sorcery might be alchemy. So Joe Sorcerer is going to take Alchemist at level 3, which uses up all of his unused NCs, dropping him down to 0. So now just for just to go quickly, we'll make it so that Joe Wizard is a skilled unarmed fighter, which will make him better at punching, kicking, and dodging. and he is also an acrobat, which will improve his balance and his dodge, and will also make it possible for him to perform acrobatic strikes. And then one other thing that I want to show you here is that you will see there are two boxes at the top. There's plus C's and there's minus C's. So the plus C's you use to purchase combat peculiarity levels with experience. So for example, if I hadn't bought this level of leadership, he would still have 50 unused XPs, and he could use those to buy one extra level of combat peculiarities. The box next to it, which says minus C's, is used to trade combat peculiarities for non-combat peculiarities. And the character will get 2 non-combat peculiarities for every combat peculiarity he trades away. So in this case, if we were to trade away both of his remaining combat peculiarities, he would gain 4 non-combat peculiarities, which he could then assign to non-combat type things. Like, for example, he might want to take Apothecary at level 3, which would allow him to make chemicals in addition to potions. And finally, he might want to take Physical Beauty at level 1. Now you'll notice that when I took Physical Beauty, it changed this box up here, which is the character's Physical Beauty. If you don't take any Physical Beauty peculiarity, the character will show up as average, Joe Wizard average. But if you take an unattractive peculiarity, such as unattractive, it will change your Physical Beauty appropriately. And if you take a Physical Beauty advantage, it will do the same. So in this case, Physical Beauty at level 1 makes Joe Wizard good looking. So with these various skills, the next thing Joe Wizard needs to do is to choose his spells. And that is shown down here in the bottom corner. Now each of these is fully customizable. So if you wanted to have 3 boxes of spells, because he's going to have a lot of different spell groups, you could do that. Some of them are pre-programmed to fill in the spell groups for sort of specialty type casters, like spiritual calling or animal spirit or nature spirit, that sort of thing. But if you wanted to, you could make them all just be spells. Oops, messed that up. You could make them all spells. And in this case, you can see here that it's showing, based on his intellect, which is 8, Joe Wizard is entitled to 12 spell levels. So he can go through this drop down, choose his various spell groups, and then choose the level that he wants to take that spell group, which cannot exceed his sorcery level. So in this case, because he is only sorcery level 3, the maximum level he can take is 3. So he might want to take defense, harm at 3, and then he might want to take metamagic at 3, and that leaves him 3. And then let's say instead he decides to take heal at 3 and be sort of a party healer. What he then might also want to do is to take the ritual called Raise Dead. And in that case, it's a power level 3 ritual. So he would write down specific ritual, power level 3, and then for his notes, he would write down that his specific ritual is Raise Dead over here in the notes, and it would be reflected here. But now you can see that his spell slots are full, 12 of 12, and that because of his willpower and intellect, he has 14 mana, which obviously how that is used is explained in the rules. So with that done, His whole character sheet is complete with the exception of buying equipment. Now, all characters will start with 1,000 credits that they can spend on equipment, unless you take the peculiarity flat broke, in which case you'll start with no credits worth of equipment. You'll only have your default tattered clothing, which has a value of 0. But in this case, let's say Joe Wizard, he doesn't like tattered clothing, so what he's going to do is he's going to buy a robe. Oops. He's going to buy a robe. And he wants to look impressive, so he's going to buy a high quality robe. And what you'll see is that changing the robe's quality from average quality to high quality increased the cost from 100 to 300. Joe is size 5, so he's going to need a size 5 robe. If this were a size 4 robe, it would be cheaper, but it would be too small for Joe to wear. The other thing is that Joe can decide where exactly he's carrying his robe. Ready means that it is a piece of ready equipment. It's being carried on his load system in an easily accessible location, but in this case, he probably wants it worn. He could also choose to be carrying the robe in his backpack, if he had a backpack, or he could just say the robe is off. He left it at home. But in this case, the robe is worn, so at a glance you can see that he's wearing his robe, and the effective weight is the same as its normal weight. If it were ready, then the effective weight would be reduced by the quality of his load system. Like, for example, if he were to go with a superior quality load system, instead of being 0.1 kilograms, it would be 0.07 kilograms. A load system is basically the types of things that a character has that will enable him to carry equipment. So a poor quality load system, which is the default, is just things like pockets and cords and things like that. Very, very primitive methods of carrying things around. As you progress upward, it might be things like ammunition belts, bandoliers, military, load harness, all those sorts of things. And all of them will affect the overall effective weight of things that are being carried at the ready. If a character buys a backpack, the same sort of thing applies. The weight reduction will be based on the quality of the backpack. And as you can see, it's a pretty significant difference between load system and backpack. So if this robe were being carried in his backpack, the weight reduction would be even more significant. That may not seem like a lot, but let's say he was carrying 100 robes, then it would be the difference between 10 kilograms and 6 kilograms, which could be very, very significant. But in this case, we'll leave it at one high-quality robe, which he is wearing. Now, you'll see there are certain special boxes. All of the things you can buy in these special boxes, you can also buy down here as items. So, for example, if you just found a pistol, you could put it here, a GH2 pistol, and say that you're carrying it in your backpack. That would be no problem. But to the same extent, you could buy a GH2 pistol. You could buy a GH2 pistol here, and it will then calculate the stats for the character using that GH2 pistol. And then, of course, the options here for the GH2 pistol are the same, but generally speaking, if you're putting a weapon up here, it's a weapon that you're planning to use, so your options would either be ready, which means the pistol is in its holster, or held, which means the pistol is actually in the character's hand. And the same is true for melee weapons. You could choose, for example, a combat knife and adjust the quality. So a high quality combat knife, and then this would be essentially he's carrying his combat knife in one hand, his GH2 pistol in another hand. And then just to round him out, we'll buy Joe a magical focus, essentially a magic wand, which will give him a bonus for casting his spells. The problem is, as you can see here, Joe has now spent 4,600 credits, but he only had 1,000 credits to start. So he needs to account for those additional credits in some way. And the way you do that is you look over here under credits, and it shows an XP equivalent of 36. So if Joe wants to keep all of this equipment, he needs to pay for these additional credits with experience by reducing his starting experience by the 36 credits. Now, you don't need to do this if you stay within the 1,000 credits that are free, but this is a good way to go if you want a character to start with a specific loadout of equipment or items of a particular quality. And it can be useful because you won't have to search for it in the game. You won't have to hope that you find it on someone or find it in a store. But in this case, Joe Wizard, he subtracts 36 experience points from his starting experience. And the problem is that now leaves him with 36 unused. So he's got to decide which of these abilities he wants to trade away. So he'll drop his willpower back down to level 0. This leaves him with 14 unused experience. That gets him that much closer to the next level that he'll be able to buy. But it also takes him out of experience debt, and so he's good with the GM. One other thing you'll notice, though, is that by dropping below the 500 experience point threshold, Joe also lost one level of combat peculiarity levels. So he's got to account for that also. So in this case, he'll reduce his acrobatics from 3 to 2, and now he's even up. He's back down to a positive XP score. He's got 0 unused NCs, 0 unused Cs, and he's looking good. Character sheet is pretty much finished. One other thing I wanted to point out is that while this page 2, this is what we could essentially refer to as page 2 of the character sheet, lists all of the various items that the character has purchased, the combat statistics for those items are actually shown on page 1 right here. So for example, the combat knife that he purchased, you can see he's got an attack of +6, he's got a melee block of +7, a ranged block of +4, damage class of 6, armor piercing of 0, and a total length of 5. To the same extent, with his GH2 pistol, he has an attack of +5, a magazine of 10, a load score of 1, does damage class 9, has a range of 5, which just means that he suffers a -1 penalty for every 5 meters of range, and a burst score of 1, which means if he wants to, he can fire 3 shots in a single attack instead of just 1 shot. So it's good to know that this is where you actually find the combat statistics of the various weapons that are purchased over here. Now, if you were to purchase armor, the armor would show up on your character sheet. It'll automatically be the correct size for your character. So if you actually acquire armor that is a different size that you're not going to be able to wear, but you'll just carry around, it's best to put that in under equipment and then define the appropriate size. So Joe, if he found this suit of size 4 light armor, he wouldn't be able to wear it, but he could carry it around and he could sell it. And if he wanted to, he could put it in his backpack, etc. But when you do put armor here in the armor slot, it will automatically adjust the damage resistance scores, which are right here, sort of hidden in the middle of page 1. And what you'll see is that by wearing light armor, Joe's base DR increased from 6 to 7. So his armor DR is 7. His base DR is 6. His armor DR is 7. And his sharp DR, which is 4, increases to a sharp armor DR of 6. This number here, AC, is armor coverage. That is the success margin that the attacker needs to beat, not equal, the number that the attacker needs to beat in order to avoid Joe's armor. But in this case, Joe's not going to buy any armor, and so he's also not going to buy this armor. So we're back down to the 36, which he's paid for. Joe is completely even, and he is done. Just a few more things to show you on the character sheet. There is a notes page, which is free text. You can write in anything you want about the character. And there is also a temp page, which allows you to temporarily increase various attributes as perhaps the effect of spells or potions or anything along those lines. You'll notice that if you increase mass, it will also automatically increase the character's size. So if you want to increase mass without increasing the character's size, just put a negative modifier in on size, and you will now see that the character's mass has increased, but his size has stayed the same. Some of the other things on the temp sheet correspond to specific spells or specific peculiarities. This first box here pertains to the Berserker peculiarity, and choosing the various drop downs will affect the bonuses that are provided by Berserker. And then animal form, when a character is in animal form, he automatically gets an increase to body and strength. And so selecting animal form will automatically affect the character's body and strength, but obviously you should only do that if the character is actually using the animal form spell. One final thing to show you is that the buyer's guide, while generally you don't need to mess with the buyer's guide, every now and then a character will need an item that is unusual or doesn't actually appear on the buyer's guide. And these yellow boxes will allow you to create custom items and assign whatever cost and weight you want. So, for example, if Joe had a family ring that he was particularly proud of or that was significant to the story, he could just add that as a custom item. So the Soul Gen is meant to be as flexible as the rules themselves. There's a lot you can do with it. You can design virtually any kind of character that you can imagine, add whatever custom items the GM is willing to approve, add temporary modifiers on the fly, and then finally, and this is why the Soul Gen is so useful, as you experience various conditions in the game, these drop downs will automatically apply the appropriate modifiers. So for example, if we were to look at this character's athletics of 5, at uninjured it's 5. If you were to go to injured, it would automatically drop down to 4, along with the other appropriate attributes. If he were to go to critically injured, his athletics would drop down to 2. And you'll notice that his various combat scores also changed in accordance with his injury condition. The same is true of Winded. If you apply Winded, it will reduce all the scores that are affected by Winded. If you apply Fatigue, it will reduce all the scores that are affected by Fatigue. And if you want to apply an overall penalty or an overall bonus, you can do that as well, and it will affect all of the appropriate attributes. So that's the real advantage to being able to use the live character sheet, is that it will make all of your modifications on the fly, and whatever attributes or scores show up on the character sheet are the actual attributes and scores you'll be using in the game. You can easily sell items by simply selecting the $$ on the WH ? Where column. So for example, if he wanted to sell this GH2 pistol, he'd just put it as being sold, and it would calculate right here on the sell total. And he can do that with pretty much everything that he's carrying, and it'll add up. Now the sell total is based upon the character's haggling scores as defined in the rules. So this is a very convenient way to figure out exactly how much money a character is going to get for selling his equipment. The character can then account for that equipment by simply adding an appropriate number of coins. In this case, it would be 4 gold and 8 silver, and then he can simply delete the items that he has sold, and he's all set. Let's reset these to ready so that they're ready to go for the next time he finds equipment. And that's just a handy little tool that I wanted to show you. So thank you for watching.